My name is Dr. Bruce Pilbeam, and I teach and write in the areas of international relations and peace and conflict studies.
My name is Dr. Peter Hough. I write and I teach in the areas of international relations and international security.
One of the major challenges I find in teaching international relations today is the highly unpredictable, highly volatile environment in which we live. The world is faced by numerous conflicts, and we see that in places like Ukraine, Myanmar, Gaza, but there are also many other pressing problems as well. There is climate change, there is numerous refugee crises in the world, there are problems like transnational crime and terrorism, and trying to get an understanding of all of this together can be very, very difficult. So one of the tasks I see of a book like World Politics is try to help students really get a handle on all these issues and to kind of present the information to them in a up-to-date, integrated way.
In line with what Bruce just said there, in terms of the challenges of teaching international relations, I think another one that comes up refers to the complexity that Bruce spoke about there, which is there's a danger sometimes of thinking, we're providing the answer. Well, we're not. We're providing a range of opportunities to understand the situation better and some partial explanations. So whether that be the Ukraine war, or the Gaza crisis, or the politics of climate change, what we hope to offer are competing explanations and allow the student to think for themselves what they think the answers might be. Well, there's little doubt that students find IR theories very challenging. IR theories are very much essential for studying international relations and for making sense of those sorts of issues like the Ukraine war, the Gaza crisis, or climate change. But you can't really fully comprehend them and appreciate them unless you have a grounding in the theories to start with. The problem can be that students sometimes find IR theories dry, abstract, maybe even pretentious. And so the key is to get over that and present them in a way which they can find relatable and something that they can apply to thinking about contemporary issues. So that's something that we most certainly strive for in this book.
One of the challenges I find with students today is making the connections between the theories and the frameworks and the concepts that Peter was talking about and real-world developments and events. So one of the central tasks I saw with this new edition of World Politics, is really helping them to make those connections. So for example, when I write about the topic of security, we introduced ideas like the referent object, securitization theory. I think the way to do that is by drawing attention to how relevant that is to understanding so many contemporary developments like cyber warfare, cybersecurity, and those kind of issues.
Well, in terms of engaging students into the content that we're using, a key thing certainly again with the theories is to make sure that they are relatable. So for each of the theory chapters, I start off by trying to distill what are the key themes of each theoretical approach, what assumptions do they make about the world and in terms of trying to conceptualize it. Secondly, look to try and compare and contrast those different theories. How do they fit in with each other? And then thirdly, relate them to contemporary practice, because I think it's this aspect which really makes the theories come alive and seem relevant to the students. So for instance, in the book, I use the example of North Korean nuclear strategy as a way of illustrating realism. I do this, because North Korea, I think in this instance represents a very good illustration of realism, because they're acting in a way which disregards international law, disregards the opinions of other countries in the pursuit of their own national interest, which is very much in line with classic realist behaviour. The second reason to use it is because it's an unorthodox example. Realism is associated with the US, it's associated with the political right. We wouldn't typically associate it with a country like North Korea. And I think that helps, A, in terms of making the example stand out, but B, also in terms of giving a standout kind of a version which allows students to not fall into the trap of thinking certain theoretical approaches are associated with certain countries. So it's a way of bringing it home and making it more relatable. In teaching in general, I think it is good practice to be able to relate theories to examples. And that's something we do throughout the book. So again, if you're looking at the Ukraine war, is that explainable by a failure of balance of power politics, as a classic realist might say? Or can we find partial answers in looking at identity politics and the fact that Putin appears to be driven by, lamenting the loss of the Soviet Union, or even going back further to Frederick the Great? So the kind of identity politics that a social constructivist might be more inclined to offer, that they offer explanations. So hopefully in those ways we can, make theory have relevance and seem relevant to the student.
When it comes to engaging students, one of the things that I find is that teaching the kind of topics that we do can very easily lead to quite pessimistic and quite depressing conclusions, quite frankly. So I think one of the ways to engage them is to make sure that we're not just addressing all the many terrible problems that there are in the world, but also offering them potential solutions. And I think that's particularly relevant and particularly engaging to students, because so many of them want to pursue careers in these sort of areas. They want to work in governments, they want to work in international organisations, they want to work in NGOs, will actively be working on these problems. So as well as talking about problems, we talk about issues like diplomacy, international cooperation, the role of treaties and conventions, humanitarian interventions, peacekeeping and peace-building missions. And I think in that way, that really gets students' engagement, because they can then really see, what is the point of studying these issues, if not to try to think about ways in which we can actually address them.
Well, in terms of tips to give to lecturers teaching international relations, I think the first overarching point to bear in mind is I certainly, and it's probably the same with Bruce, used my lectures as a starting point for writing the chapters. So they are very much, designed with teaching in mind. Our approach is to be as comprehensive as possible and to be accessible, but not to dumb down, and hopefully also, give the students something to think about when they're reading. In many ways, the art of teaching is very similar to the art of textbook writing. You want to present complex ideas in an accessible way which remains authoritative. And so that's certainly always been what we've striven for when we've been writing the chapters and as the book has evolved.
I think the starting point for me in terms of offering tips to lecturers in international relations is really twofold. First of all, it's absolutely vital to provide students with a really solid but also critical grounding in the key concepts and theories. So we need to talk about the meaning of war and peace and security and power and all these kind of crucial concepts. Alongside this, giving them an introduction to some of the major actors involved in international relations today, including international bodies like the United Nations, states, NGOs, and other actors like this. But I think at the same time, it's really kind of beholden upon all of us working in this area to show, what's the relevance of all this? What's the point of studying these ideas in the first place? So again, I think it comes back very much to relating the ideas to real world examples. So for example, as Peter's talked about also previously, when we're looking at contemporary events like the war in Ukraine, how well does traditional international relations theory actually explain this conflict? Theories like realism, for example, certainly has some value in offering us understandings of power politics, states pursuing the national interest, aiming for goals like the acquisition of territory and power and all of these sorts of things. What I think it also teaches us that we also need to look at perhaps newer, more contemporary thinking, more contemporary ideas. So this is where we bring in maybe social constructivism, feminism and so on. So for example, in this conflict again, we see the role of social media in spreading misinformation, disinformation, which I think in a perspective like social constructionism can be really helpful in illuminating. And also the issue of gender, the kind of gender-related violence, the disproportionate effect that conflicts like the present one have upon women in all sorts of ways, through trafficking, displacement, and all these kind of areas. So I think again that really is to me the thing that I think we should all bear in mind, that we're not just studying these topics for the sake of it, we're studying them because they allow us to understand the world in a better way.
Well, our hope is very much that we can give ideas both on how to structure and to fill the content of the lectures. In addition to that, hopefully we provide starting points for student discussions in seminars, points of interest to sort of take forward in terms of assessments as well. Of course, we also include things such as suggested readings. We've tried to be quite contemporary and quite tailored in the kind of things that we recommend, so they can be utilised also in terms of a reading list. And again, to get back to the point I made earlier, the book was very much written with teaching in mind. So, the hope is that it will be an invaluable guide to lecturers in that regard.